The grand auditorium buzzed with excitement. Families filled every row, cameras flashed, and the air carried the sweet scent of roses from bouquets held by proud parents. It wasn't just a graduation, it was the biggest celebration of the year. At the center of it all stood Ryan Mitchell, a self-made millionaire, perfectly dressed in a tailored navy suit. He wasn't here as just another parent or a face in the crowd. No, Ryan was the guest of honor, invited to give the keynote speech as the school's most generous benefactor. When the announcer called his name, the audience erupted into applause. Students whispered about him with awe. "That's Ryan Mitchell, the man who turned a small tech idea into millions," one student said. To everyone watching, Ryan looked like a man who had it all: wealth, respect, influence. His smile was confident, his stride steady as he walked toward the podium. The spotlight followed him. He gripped the microphone, ready to deliver words of wisdom about success and perseverance. The auditorium grew silent, waiting for him to speak. But just as he cleared his throat, something caught his eye near the back of the hall. His smile faltered. His eyes froze. Because entering through the side doors, with quiet dignity, was a woman he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Emily. The woman he had once cast out of his life. But she wasn't alone. At her side walked a tall, composed man in a charcoal gray suit, Alexander Harrington, the reclusive billionaire known for his sharp mind and hidden fortune. And between them was a young woman, radiant in her graduation gown. Her features, those eyes, that jawline, were unmistakable. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. It was like looking into a mirror of his past. The girl was his daughter. The auditorium didn't notice yet. But Ryan's world was already crumbling. And in seconds, the entire hall would see what he saw. Long before the applause and cameras of the graduation hall, there was another story, one hidden in the shadows of Ryan Mitchell's luxurious mansion. Emily Carter had once walked those halls, not as a wife or partner, but as a maid. She was barely 20, quiet and diligent, with a softness in her eyes that made her seem out of place in the cold marble corridors of wealth. She scrubbed floors, polished silver, and carried trays for guests who barely noticed her presence. To them, she was invisible. But Ryan noticed. Back then, Ryan wasn't yet a millionaire. He was ambitious, restless, always chasing the next deal. Emily, with her innocence and kindness, was like fresh air in a house filled with pride. Their late-night conversations began innocently. He would linger in the kitchen while she cleaned, asking about her dreams. She told him she wanted to study, maybe teach one day. He laughed and told her she was too gentle for a world as cruel as his. Then one night, his hand lingered on hers. That was how it started. For Emily, it felt like a secret fairy tale. The powerful man of the house choosing her, whispering promises of love, telling her she was different from anyone else. She believed him. She gave him her heart, and soon she gave him more. Her trust, her body, her future. When she discovered she was pregnant, she trembled but also smiled. She thought it would bring them closer, thought he would finally see her not as the maid, but as his partner, the mother of his child. But she was wrong. Ryan's ambition had no room for a scandal. A maid carrying his child, it would destroy the image he worked so hard to build. His words, once sweet, turned sharp. "You're ruining everything," he spat one stormy night. She begged him to think of the baby, to remember his promises, but Ryan only saw weakness, a burden. And then came the night that broke her world apart. Rain hammered against the windows as Ryan stood in the grand foyer, his face twisted with cold resolve. Emily, clutching her small suitcase with trembling hands, begged him through tears. "Please, don't do this. I have nowhere to go." His reply was a blade to her heart. "Then you'll learn to survive. But not here. Not with me." The door slammed shut behind her, thunder cracking in the distance. She stumbled into the night, her clothes soaked, her body shaking, not just from the cold, but from the realization that the man she loved had cast her aside without mercy. She pressed her hand against her belly, whispering to the child inside, "I'll protect you, even if I have nothing left." And from that night on, she was alone. For months, Emily struggled. She took odd jobs, slept in cramped rooms, fought through hunger and exhaustion. The world looked at her as just another abandoned woman, a cautionary tale. Yet she carried her baby with a fierce determination that no one could extinguish. What she didn't know then was that fate had not abandoned her completely. because someone else was watching. A figure from her past, a man who would soon change everything. And when he stepped into her life, Emily's story would begin to rise from the ashes. Emily's world had shrunk to survival. Each day was a battle. Scrubbing tables at diners, folding clothes at laundromats, watching every penny so she could afford a small room in a rundown building. The pregnancy weighed on her, both physically and emotionally. Nights were the hardest. Lying awake, she often felt the loneliness pressing on her chest like a stone. There was no one to share the fear with, no one to whisper that everything would be all right. But fate has a way of testing, then surprising. One rainy afternoon, Emily found herself faint and dizzy on the street after finishing a long shift. Her hand clutched her swollen belly as she steadied herself against a lamppost. Just as her knees buckled, a firm hand caught her arm. "Emily?" a familiar voice said, filled with shock. She blinked, and when her eyes focused, she saw him, Alexander Harrington. Memories rushed back. Years earlier, he had been her quiet classmate in community college. Alexander had always been the one sitting at the back of the room, dressed modestly but with an intensity in his gaze. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried thoughtfulness. Back then, Emily had noticed his kindness, how he'd offer her notes when she missed class, how he'd ask about her day when no one else did. Now, standing before her, he was no longer the shy student. His posture was confident, his tailored coat sharp, his presence commanding. Yet his eyes, the same gentle gray, were filled with concern. "Emily, what happened to you?" he asked, steadying her as she trembled. Tears stung her eyes. She didn't want to answer. How could she explain the shame, the betrayal, the nights of hunger? But something in his gaze, something safe, broke her silence. Between sobs, she told him the truth. About Ryan. About the baby. About being thrown out like she was nothing. Alexander listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, her shoulders sagged under the weight of her confession. She expected pity. She expected judgment. Instead, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. From that moment, Alexander became her anchor. He arranged a safe place for her to live, ensuring she no longer had to shuffle between temporary rooms. He made sure she had medical care, healthy food, and rest. For the first time in months, Emily felt the storm in her life begin to calm. But it wasn't charity. Alexander treated her with dignity. He never made her feel like a burden. Instead, he reminded her of the girl she used to be, the one with dreams beyond survival. One evening, as they sat across from each other in a small cafe, Alexander finally revealed his own truth. "I wasn't just your classmate, Emily," he confessed. "I watched you, admired you. Even when you didn't notice me, you gave me hope. I've built a life now, more than I ever imagined. But it means nothing if I can't use it to protect someone who deserves so much more." Emily's breath caught. She had seen whispers of wealth around him, the expensive car, the discreet bodyguard waiting outside, but she never imagined the scale. Alexander wasn't just doing well. He was a rising billionaire, his business empire growing quietly yet powerfully. For Emily, it wasn't his money that mattered. It was the sincerity in his eyes. He didn't see her as ruined or weak. He saw her as worthy. That night, as she rested her hand on her belly, Emily whispered to her unborn child, "We're not alone anymore." And in that moment, for the first time since the stormy night she was cast out, she believed it. Because Alexander had come back into her life, not just as a savior, but as the man who would stand by her side. Emily had spent months believing she would face motherhood alone. Nights filled with fear gave her no comfort, only the weight of a future she couldn't imagine surviving. But after Alexander stepped into her life, the darkness began to lift. Slowly, painfully, she allowed herself to trust again. At first, she resisted his help. "I don't want to be your burden," she whispered one evening as he drove her to a doctor's appointment. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "You're not a burden," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "You and that child, you deserve more than scraps of survival. You deserve safety, dignity, and love." Something about the way he said love made her heart ache. Not romantic love, not yet, but something pure. The commitment of a man who wanted to protect her, not possess her. When the day of the birth came, Emily was terrified. The sterile hospital walls felt cold and unwelcoming, her body trembling with both pain and panic. But when she looked up, Alexander was there. He held her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement when her strength faltered. And then, with a final cry that seemed to split the air, Sophia was born. The nurse placed the tiny baby in Emily's arms. Tears blurred her vision as she gazed at her daughter's delicate face. Those eyes, that jawline, it was impossible not to see Ryan's reflection in her. For a fleeting moment, Emily's heart clenched with old wounds. But then Sophia let out a soft whimper, and Emily realized this child wasn't a shadow of her past. She was the light of her future. Alexander stood nearby, his gaze fixed on the newborn. When Emily looked at him, he smiled faintly. "She's beautiful," he said. Then, softer, almost reverently, "She's yours, and if you'll let me, I'll be her father too." It wasn't an empty promise. In the weeks that followed, Alexander proved it again and again. He handled sleepless nights, pacing the floor with Sophia in his arms so Emily could rest. He learned how to mix formula, how to swaddle, how to soothe her tiny cries. When the world looked at Sophia, they might see Ryan's features. But when Sophia looked up at Alexander, she saw love, the kind Ryan could never have given. Together, they built a quiet life. Not flashy, not drenched in the spotlight of Ryan's world, but filled with warmth. Emily cooked simple dinners. Alexander came home from long days of running his growing empire, always making time to sit with her and the baby. Their house echoed not with emptiness, but with laughter, baby giggles, and the sound of a family healing. Still, Emily carried scars. At times, she woke from nightmares of that stormy night, her body shivering as though the rain still soaked her clothes. But each time, Alexander was there, pulling her close, whispering, "You're safe now." Slowly, the nightmares loosened their grip. As Sophia grew, so did Emily's strength. She enrolled in evening classes, finishing the education she'd once abandoned. Alexander encouraged her at every step, reminding her she wasn't just a mother, she was a woman with dreams worth chasing. For years, their world remained private. Sophia never knew the truth about her biological father. To her, Alexander was everything. Protector, guide, the man who tucked her in at night. Emily often wondered if Ryan ever thought of her, if he even remembered the child he'd cast away. But she never let the thought consume her. She had found something far more powerful than revenge. She had found family. Yet destiny has a way of circling back. And though Emily didn't know it then, the day would come when Ryan's world and hers would collide again. This time, under the bright lights of a graduation stage, with everyone watching. And when that day came, the man who once threw her away would finally face the truth he could no longer escape. While Emily rebuilt her life in quiet strength, Ryan Mitchell was constructing an empire of his own. The man who once threw her out into the rain didn't waste a second looking back. Instead, he poured every ounce of his energy into deals, investments, and the pursuit of wealth. To the world, he was a visionary, bold, relentless, the kind of man who could turn opportunity into gold with a single signature. Ryan's story became one that magazines loved to print. From struggling entrepreneur to millionaire mogul. He bought sleek cars, dined at the most exclusive restaurants, and moved into a glass tower penthouse overlooking the city. The image was flawless, crafted carefully for the press. He wanted the world to see him as untouchable. And soon, he found the perfect partner to complete that image, Vanessa Kingsley. Vanessa wasn't just beautiful. She was power wrapped in elegance. The daughter of a prestigious family with deep political ties, she carried herself like royalty. Her presence could silence a room. Ryan was captivated, not only by her charm but by the doors her last name could open. For Vanessa, Ryan was equally useful. He had money, charisma, and ambition. She, however, carried a secret sorrow. She could not bear children. At first, this truth haunted her. In the world she came from, children were legacy, proof of a family's strength. But Ryan dismissed her fears with a confident smile. "We don't need children," he told her. "We have power, wealth, status. That's all that matters." So they became a union built not on love, but on mutual advantage. Together they were photographed at galas, featured on magazine covers, whispered about as a power couple destined for greatness. Vanessa's family influence combined with Ryan's financial firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Board members bowed to them. Politicians courted them. And in every picture, Ryan wore the smile of a man who believed he had conquered the world. Yet behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Vanessa was intelligent, too intelligent not to notice the coldness in Ryan's heart. He cared about winning, not about people. He treated employees like pawns, friends like tools, and even her like a trophy to display. Still, she stayed, partly because of duty to her family, partly because leaving would mean scandal, and partly because she hoped deep down that power might soften him, that maybe success would make him human. But the truth was different. With every deal, with every new luxury, Ryan grew colder. He had everything money could buy, yet there was always a restlessness in his eyes, as if something was missing. He didn't know it, but what gnawed at him was the one thing he had cast away years earlier: blood. A legacy. A child. When people asked why he and Vanessa had no children, he brushed it off with clever excuses. "We're too busy conquering the world," he'd laugh, holding her hand for the cameras. The truth never crossed his lips, that somewhere out there was a girl with his eyes, his jawline, his blood. A girl he had abandoned. For years the illusion held. Ryan and Vanessa stood as one, hosting charity events, expanding influence, silencing gossip. To the outside world, they were untouchable. But illusions have a way of shattering. Because destiny was patient. And one day, in the most public way possible, the life Ryan built on lies would crumble before everyone's eyes. And it would all begin at a graduation stage, where the daughter he denied would rise, and the wife he cast aside would return stronger than ever. At first, Vanessa Kingsley Mitchell thought she had chosen well. Ryan was everything her world demanded: handsome, ambitious, rich, and bold enough to stand beside her without trembling under the weight of her family's name. Together, they were unstoppable, the darling couple of high society. Whenever they stepped onto a red carpet, camera flashes followed like lightning. People whispered that they were the future, money and legacy woven into one. But the longer Vanessa lived beside Ryan, the more she began to notice the shadows. It was subtle at first: a harsh tone to an assistant who forgot a detail, a sharp dismissal of a colleague's idea. Then came moments of cruelty that startled her. At a gala, she watched Ryan humiliate an employee in front of donors, reducing the man to stammers and shame. In private, she challenged him, her voice low but firm. "Ryan, that was unnecessary," he scoffed. "Weakness has no place in this world, Vanessa. If he can't take pressure, he doesn't belong in my circle." His words chilled her. This wasn't strength, it was arrogance. The unease grew. At family dinners, Vanessa's relatives would ask about children. She would force a polite smile, changing the subject. Ryan, however, would charm his way through with half-jokes. "Our empire is our child," he'd say, raising a glass of champagne. People laughed, but Vanessa saw the flicker in his eyes, a hunger, a void he could never fill. One evening she found him in his office, staring at old photographs of himself as a young man. There was a strange melancholy in his expression. "Do you regret not having children?" she asked softly. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Children tie you down. They make you weak. I chose power instead." Vanessa studied him, her chest tightening. She had always feared her inability to bear children would doom her marriage. But now she realized the truth. Even if she could, Ryan's heart might never have been open to them. Still, she stayed. She told herself it was duty, image, partnership. But deep down, cracks were spreading through her loyalty. She began to see Ryan not as the man she once admired, but as someone dangerous, a man who valued nothing beyond himself. The breaking point came one evening at a charity dinner. A guest spoke warmly about adopting children, about how legacy was more than blood or wealth. The room applauded, but Ryan laughed, a cold, cutting sound. "Children are a liability," he declared. "They drain you, distract you, and worst of all, they make you sentimental. And sentiment is weakness." The applause died. An awkward silence spread across the table. Vanessa's cheeks burned with shame. She excused herself, retreating to the powder room. Staring into the mirror, she saw her reflection with new clarity. Who was this man she had tied her life to? A man who mocked what others cherished? A man whose hunger for power eclipsed compassion? For the first time, she imagined leaving. Not for scandal, not for rebellion, but for survival of her own soul. Yet Vanessa was strategic. She didn't act on impulse. She waited, observed, and quietly prepared. And then fate intervened. At a graduation stage, in a hall filled with hundreds, she would finally see the truth she needed. The man she married had abandoned a woman and a child, his own flesh and blood. And in that moment, she would know there was no future left to fight for. Because Vanessa could accept many flaws in a man, but not the kind that denied his own blood. While Ryan built his empire on ambition and pride, Emily's world blossomed quietly, far from flashing cameras and magazine covers. Her life with Alexander and Sophia was not drenched in glamour but in something far richer: love. From the moment Sophia was born, Alexander stepped into the role of father without hesitation. The first night at home, when Sophia's tiny cries filled the air, it wasn't Emily who leapt from bed. It was Alexander. He stumbled awkwardly with a bottle, whispering encouragement to himself as though the baby could hear. Emily smiled through her exhaustion, watching a man who commanded boardrooms cradle a child like she was the most precious treasure on earth. Years passed, and Sophia grew surrounded by warmth. Their home was filled not with marble coldness, but with books, laughter, and the smell of home-cooked meals. Alexander insisted on family dinners, no matter how busy he became. He listened intently as Sophia recited stories from school, his serious face breaking into rare, tender smiles at her excitement. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be smart like you," Sophia said once, her eyes shining. Alexander leaned down, brushing her hair from her forehead. "Be smarter, be braver, be kinder. That's what will make you truly powerful." Emily's heart swelled at moments like that. She often thought of Ryan, how he had thrown her away without a second thought. And then she looked at Alexander, who had chosen her not despite her scars, but because he believed she deserved healing. She knew then that Sophia had the father she needed, even if blood said otherwise. Life wasn't without struggle. There were nights when Emily's past haunted her, when she feared Ryan might one day appear and try to claim what he had abandoned. But Alexander always reassured her. "The past can't hurt you anymore," he whispered, holding her close. "And if it tries, it'll have to go through me first." Sophia thrived. She excelled in school, curious and determined, a reflection of Emily's resilience and Alexander's wisdom. Teachers praised her intellect. Friends admired her kindness. What no one could ignore, however, was her face. She carried Ryan's sharp jawline, his piercing eyes, features impossible to hide. Strangers often commented, "She looks like someone I know," though they could never place it. Emily's stomach twisted each time, but she kept the truth locked away. When Sophia turned 12, Alexander gave her a journal, embossed with her initials. "Write your dreams here," he said. "Every great life starts with a vision." Sophia filled the pages with ambitions: college, traveling, making a difference. She never once mentioned her biological father. To her, Alexander was everything. The contrast between households was striking. While Ryan and Vanessa hosted glittering galas, desperate to prove their worth to the world, Emily's family spent evenings baking cookies, watching movies, or taking quiet walks under city lights. Theirs was not a life the tabloids would cover, but it was a life that mattered. On Sophia's 16th birthday, Emily watched her daughter blow out candles, her laughter ringing through the house. Tears pricked her eyes. She thought of the rainy night she had been cast out, alone and hopeless. She thought of how close she had come to losing everything. And now, here stood her daughter, strong and radiant, surrounded by love. Emily whispered to Alexander later that night, "We gave her what Ryan never could." Alexander kissed her forehead. "We gave her a family." What Emily didn't know was that this quiet, hidden world was moving toward a collision. Sophia's brilliance was about to take her into the spotlight, a spotlight Ryan could not ignore. And when the past and present finally clashed, their carefully built life would be tested before the entire world. Sophia grew into a young woman who carried both grace and fire. By the time she entered high school, it was clear she wasn't ordinary. Teachers praised her for her sharp mind, classmates admired her for her kindness, and Emily often stood back in awe, wondering how the tiny baby she once held through sleepless nights had blossomed into someone so extraordinary. Alexander nurtured her brilliance. He pushed her not toward wealth or status, but toward knowledge and strength of character. "The world will test you," he told her. "It will try to break you down. But if you carry your mind and heart with courage, you'll always rise above." Sophia listened. She threw herself into studies, joining debate teams, leading student organizations, and volunteering at community centers. She was ambitious, but not for fame. She wanted to make her mother proud, to give back to the man she called Dad. By junior year, universities began noticing. Letters arrived, glowing with praise, urging her to apply. But Sophia remained grounded. "I don't just want to succeed for me," she told Emily one night as they washed dishes side by side. "I want people to see that we can come from nothing and still shine." Emily felt her throat tighten. Her daughter didn't know the full truth yet. The stormy night, the betrayal, the man who had abandoned them both. But somehow, Sophia's heart already carried the strength born from that pain. Senior year brought its final challenge, the prestigious speech given by the graduating valedictorian. To no one's surprise, Sophia earned the honor. The principal called Emily personally, his voice brimming with pride. "Your daughter is remarkable," he said. "She will inspire every student who hears her." Emily wept quietly that night, her hands trembling as she folded laundry. She remembered the girl she once was, standing in the rain, hopeless. And now her daughter would stand on a stage, honored before hundreds. It was a redemption she had never dared to dream. Alexander, as always, was practical. "This speech will put her in the spotlight," he warned gently. "People will start asking questions about her father." Emily hesitated. They had hidden the truth for so long. She feared the storm it might bring. But Sophia was no longer a child. She was becoming a woman, one who deserved answers. The weeks leading to graduation were a blur of rehearsals, fittings, and late-night practice sessions. Emily would sit in the living room, listening as Sophia recited drafts of her speech. Each word carried conviction, a blend of intellect and empathy that silenced any doubt she was destined for greatness. One evening, after finishing, Sophia turned to her mother and Alexander with shining eyes. "Everything I am is because of you," she said. "You taught me resilience, you showed me love. When I stand on that stage, I want the world to know that family isn't about blood. It's about who stays, who cares, and who believes." Emily broke down in tears, pulling her daughter into her arms. She wanted to protect her from the storm waiting ahead, but she also knew this was Sophia's destiny. The stage was set. Sophia was ready to shine, unaware that fate was weaving a cruel twist. Because seated in the front rows as a guest of honor would be the man she had never known, the man whose blood ran in her veins. And when their eyes met across the graduation hall, everything would change. For Ryan Mitchell, the graduation ceremony was not just another event. It was an opportunity, a stage to showcase his influence, to remind the world why his name commanded respect. When the university board reached out, asking him to be the guest of honor and deliver the keynote address, Ryan didn't hesitate. To him, it was perfect. A captive audience, a prestigious setting, and one more chance to polish the image he had worked so hard to build. The morning of the event, Ryan stood in front of the mirror of his penthouse, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. His reflection stared back at him. Confident, flawless, untouchable. The suit was custom-made, the cufflinks engraved with his initials, the watch on his wrist worth more than most people's yearly salaries. He smirked. Let them look. Let them envy. Vanessa entered the room quietly, dressed in her own elegant attire. She was radiant, a symbol of class, her family's influence etched into her very presence. For years, the two of them had been photographed side by side, an image of power and prestige. But today, something in her gaze was distant. Ryan didn't notice. He was too busy rehearsing his opening lines. "You're awfully confident," she remarked, her tone even. "Why wouldn't I be?" he replied smoothly. "I built everything they dream about. These students should be honored to hear from me." Vanessa didn't respond. Instead, she studied him silently, a flicker of unease crossing her face. The drive to the university was escorted, his sleek black car gliding past crowds gathering for the ceremony. Ryan basked in the attention, lowering the tinted window just enough for people to catch a glimpse. Cameras flashed. He straightened his tie again. "This is my arena." Upon arrival, faculty members greeted him with warm smiles and firm handshakes. "Mr. Mitchell, we're honored to have you here," one said. "Your support means so much to our institution." Ryan nodded graciously, though inside he felt only satisfaction. "Of course they're honored. They need me. Everyone does." In the VIP lounge, refreshments were served on silver trays. Ryan sipped champagne, glancing around at the other dignitaries. He thrived in these circles. The admiration, the whispers, the subtle power plays. It was all a game he knew how to win. As the ceremony began, he was escorted to his seat near the front, directly facing the stage. The hall buzzed with excitement, families cheering as graduates filed in wearing their caps and gowns. Ryan clapped politely, though his mind was elsewhere. On his speech, on the applause he was certain would follow. He imagined headlines the next day. Ryan Mitchell inspires the next generation. What he didn't imagine was the storm brewing only a few rows away. Because seated quietly among the crowd was a woman whose absence he had never questioned, whose pain he had never acknowledged, Emily. And beside her sat a tall man with an air of quiet power, Alexander Harrington. Between them, a young woman in a graduation gown, her face radiant, her eyes unmistakably familiar. Ryan hadn't noticed yet. Not yet. For now he was still lost in the illusion of his perfect world. The announcer's voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Ryan Mitchell." Applause erupted. Ryan rose confidently, adjusting his suit one last time. He didn't know that in mere minutes the applause would turn into whispers, and those whispers would become the very cracks that shattered his empire. Because the truth he buried long ago was about to stand before him, alive, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The applause thundered as Ryan Mitchell strode across the stage, every step measured, every smile practiced. He adjusted his cufflinks, exuding the charm that had made him the darling of business magazines. To the audience, he looked like a man in control of his destiny. He approached the podium, hands resting on the polished wood, ready to deliver his keynote. The auditorium quieted, the weight of anticipation pressing on every ear. Ryan cleared his throat, his voice smooth. "Today, we celebrate not just achievement, but possibility." And then he saw her. It began as a flicker in the corner of his eye, a presence in the crowd that felt too familiar. His gaze swept over rows of proud parents and graduates until it locked onto a face that froze his blood. Emily. Time stopped. She sat tall, her hair pulled back simply, her expression calm but unshakable. Years had passed, yet her eyes carried the same fire he remembered, though now tempered with strength he had once underestimated. Beside her was a man Ryan instantly recognized, though they had never spoken face to face, Alexander Harrington. His name carried weight in elite circles, whispered with respect and caution. A billionaire who preferred silence to spectacle, a man powerful enough to crush entire corporations with a single decision. His presence here was startling enough. But it was the young woman between them that ripped the ground from beneath Ryan. She wore her graduation gown with pride, her smile radiant as she listened to the ceremony. And when she turned her head slightly, the light revealed her features. His features. The same piercing eyes, the same angular jawline. It was like staring into a mirror of the past. Ryan's breath caught. His voice faltered. The microphone crackled as silence fell over the hall, confusion rippling through the audience. He forced a smile, tried to continue, but his words stumbled. Achievement. Possibility. Murmurs began in the crowd. Parents glanced at one another, whispering. Some tilted their heads, looking from the stage to the young graduate and back again. "Doesn't she look? She looks just like him." The whispers grew louder, like a tide pulling against the walls of the auditorium. Ryan's polished confidence wavered. Sweat formed at his temple. He gripped the podium tighter, as if it could anchor him against the storm building in the seats below. Emily's gaze never left him. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply watched, her eyes a mirror of every sleepless night, every tear shed in silence. Her presence was not vengeful, it was undeniable. Alexander sat calm and composed, his arm resting protectively on Sophia's chair. The quiet authority in his posture spoke volumes. "She is ours now. She has never needed you." Sophia, oblivious to the storm brewing, smiled proudly at her classmates. She had no idea her very existence was shattering the illusion Ryan had built for nearly 2 decades. Ryan's voice cracked again. "Success is not measured by wealth, but—" He stopped, his throat tightening. The irony burned. He, the man who had abandoned love for ambition, now preaching about values he had never lived. The whispers swelled into a low roar. Phones were raised, photos snapped, videos recorded. Ryan knew before the night ended, the images would flood social media. The millionaire frozen mid-speech, staring down at the daughter he had never claimed. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to finish, but the words rang hollow. His empire, his mask, his carefully crafted power, All of it felt like glass, splintering with every second under the weight of truth. And deep down Ryan knew this was only the beginning. Because the world had just seen the ghost he tried to bury, alive, undeniable, and sitting proudly in the front row. The applause for Ryan's stilted keynote faded into uneasy murmurs. The tension in the auditorium was thick, but the program moved forward. The principal stepped to the microphone, smiling warmly as he announced the moment everyone had been waiting for. "Now, please welcome our valedictorian, Miss Sophia Carter." The room erupted in cheers. Students stomped their feet, families clapped, and the spotlight shifted from Ryan back to the stage's center. Sophia walked with grace, her gown swishing as she climbed the steps. She looked every bit the star of the evening, radiant, confident, unbroken by the storm swirling around her. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she watched her daughter take the podium. Alexander placed a steady hand over hers, grounding her. For them, this moment wasn't about Ryan or his fall. It was about Sophia, the proof of everything they had fought for, everything they had endured. Sophia began with a bright smile, her voice clear and strong. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight we celebrate years of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. But more than that, we celebrate the people who made this journey possible, the families who stood beside us." Ryan's chest tightened as her words rang out. Each syllable was a dagger, though Sophia never intended it that way. "I want to take a moment," she continued, "to thank the two people who have shaped me into who I am. My mother, Emily Carter, who showed me what resilience looks like. She worked tirelessly, always putting me first, teaching me that true strength is born in silence, in nights no one sees, in sacrifices no one applauds." The audience clapped warmly, turning their eyes toward Emily. She smiled through her tears, her dignity shining. Ryan clenched his jaw. "Emily Carter?" Hearing her name aloud, attached to this triumph, twisted something inside him. Sophia pressed on. "And I want to thank my father, not the one who gave me blood, but the one who gave me love. Alexander Harrington." The hall stirred with recognition at the name. Alexander inclined his head modestly, his arm still around Emily's shoulders. "He believed in me when no one else did," Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. "He taught me that family isn't about titles, or wealth, or even blood. Family is about who stays, who protects, who loves without condition. And that is what he has given me every day of my life." Thunderous applause erupted. Students cheered, parents wiped their eyes. Cameras zoomed in on Alexander and Emily, capturing the picture of a family bound by love, not legacy. Ryan's world cracked wider with each clap. His palms grew damp, his throat dry. He sat rigid, a statue amidst the storm, unable to escape the truth. The daughter before him, radiant and brilliant, did not claim him. She didn't even know him. To her, he was nothing. Sophia lifted her chin proudly for her final words. "We, the graduates of this class, will face challenges, failures, and triumphs. But if I've learned anything, it's this. Success is not measured by what we take for ourselves, but by what we give to others. My journey is proof of that. Thank you." The hall exploded in standing ovation. Students tossed their caps early, unable to contain their joy. Emily and Alexander rose too, embracing Sophia as she descended the stage, her diploma clutched tight. And Ryan remained seated, his smile gone, his mask shattered. He could feel the eyes of the crowd drifting back to him, their whispers sharper now. "She looks like him. She has his eyes, his jaw." The walls were closing in, and Ryan knew. His empire of lies was collapsing, one heartfelt word at a time. As the standing ovation thundered through the hall, Vanessa Kingsley Mitchell sat frozen in her seat. Around her, families cheered, students hugged, and the atmosphere pulsed with celebration. But inside Vanessa's chest, something shifted. Something final. She had listened to Sophia's speech with rapt attention, her words slicing through the air with purity and conviction. The gratitude for Emily's resilience, the reverence for Alexander's love, it was beautiful. It was also devastating. Because in those words, Vanessa heard the silence of what was missing. Ryan. The girl on stage bore Ryan's unmistakable features. The resemblance was undeniable, written across her face like a confession carved in stone. And yet she spoke of another man as father, of another man's love as her anchor. Vanessa's mind raced, but her heart already knew the truth. Ryan had abandoned them. He had abandoned Emily when she carried his child. He had abandoned Sophia before she could even know his name. And now in this hall, under the spotlight of truth, the entire world could see the consequences of his cruelty. Vanessa's hands trembled in her lap. Memories flashed. Times she had brushed aside her doubts. Times she had told herself Ryan's ruthlessness was simply ambition. She had convinced herself that his coldness was strength, that his harsh words were strategy. But what she witnessed now was no strategy. It was cowardice, selfishness, cruelty. She turned to glance at Ryan. He sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, eyes darting between Sophia and the murmuring audience. Beads of sweat shone on his forehead. He looked less like the untouchable millionaire he projected, and more like a trapped man whose secrets had clawed their way into the open. For years, Vanessa had defended him, even to herself. She had ignored his arrogance, excused his lack of compassion, tolerated his endless hunger for power. She had accepted his dismissal of family, telling herself that together they were building a different kind of legacy. But seeing Emily's quiet dignity, Alexander's steady devotion, and Sophia's brilliance born out of love, not wealth, Vanessa felt the weight of her mistake. The final crack came when Sophia descended from the stage and embraced her mother and Alexander. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of a true family. The audience's hearts melted at the sight. Vanessa's own chest ached, not from envy, but from clarity. She leaned closer to Ryan, her voice low, almost a whisper. "That's your daughter, isn't it?" Ryan stiffened, his eyes flicked to hers, cold, defensive. "Don't start this here." Vanessa recoiled slightly, her lips parting in shock. There was no remorse in his eyes, no shame, only anger at being exposed. And that was when her heart hardened. Vanessa was not a woman who tolerated weakness, and she had just realized that Ryan's entire empire was built on it. Weakness masked as power, lies masquerading as success. She would not tie her future or her family's legacy to a man like this. The applause faded, the ceremony continued, but Vanessa's decision was already sealed. She sat through the rest of the event in silence, her mind racing, her eyes cold. Ryan had destroyed any chance of her loyalty surviving. As the audience rose for the final ovation, Vanessa stood as well, her expression unreadable. She clapped politely, her gaze fixed forward. Inside, she was already planning her exit. Because Vanessa Kingsley Mitchell would not go down with Ryan Mitchell. She would walk away, and when she did, she would take everything he had left. The ceremony ended with music and cheers, caps tossed high into the air. Students embraced, parents wept with pride, and cameras flashed to capture every moment of triumph. But for Ryan Mitchell, the night was not a celebration. It was the beginning of a nightmare. As he made his way out of the auditorium, he could feel the shift in the air. The polite smiles from faculty were tighter now, the handshakes shorter. Eyes lingered on him longer than they should, filled with questions he couldn't answer. He could hear whispers trailing behind him, murmurs that spread like wildfire. "Did you see her? She looks just like him. Why hasn't he ever mentioned a daughter?" Ryan clenched his jaw, forcing his stride to remain confident, but each step felt heavier. The image he had so carefully built was cracking, and he knew the cracks would not remain hidden for long. Outside, reporters were already gathering, their cameras poised, their microphones ready. Graduation ceremonies rarely drew much media attention, but this one had been different. Ryan's presence as guest of honor had already guaranteed coverage. And now, with photos and videos of his frozen expression beside the graduate who bore his face flooding social media, the frenzy was unavoidable. "Mr. Mitchell, is Sophia Carter your daughter? Why haven't you acknowledged her before? Did you abandon her mother years ago?" The questions fired like bullets. Ryan's bodyguards pushed through the crowd, shielding him as he made for his sleek black car. He said nothing, only lifted a hand to block the flashes. But silence, he knew, was as damning as confession. Inside the car, Vanessa sat stiffly, her gaze fixed out the window. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The distance between them was louder than any accusation. Ryan yanked at his tie, his chest tightening. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through news feeds. Already, headlines screamed across the screen. "Millionaire guest of honor frozen as graduate resembles him." Whispers of abandoned family shadow Ryan Mitchell's image. Who is Sophia Carter? The mystery that shook tonight's ceremony. His hands trembled as he read comment after comment, strangers dissecting his life with glee. "She's definitely his kid. Look at the eyes, it's undeniable." What kind of man abandons his own daughter? The car drove in silence, the city lights blurring past. Ryan's phone buzzed again and again, board members, investors, colleagues demanding answers. But he couldn't answer. What could he say? That he had thrown Emily out into the rain, pregnant and desperate? That he had chosen wealth over responsibility? For the first time in years, Ryan felt powerless. The empire he built was not collapsing from a hostile takeover or a bad investment. It was unraveling from something he had dismissed as irrelevant, a woman and a child. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice calm, almost detached. You always said children were weakness, that love was distraction. But what I saw tonight, she trailed off, her words heavy. What I saw was strength, and what I saw in you was nothing but cowardice. Ryan turned to her, anger flashing. Don't lecture me, Vanessa. You think I wanted this to happen? Her eyes met his, icy and resolute. No, but you made it happen. And now you'll pay for it. The car fell silent again. Outside, news vans raced toward his penthouse, ready to camp on his doorstep. Inside, Ryan Mitchell sat in the back seat, drowning in the realization that his carefully constructed life was slipping through his fingers. And the world had only just begun to watch him fall. While Ryan retreated into the shadows of scandal, Emily walked out of the graduation hall with her head held high. The night air was crisp, carrying the laughter of students celebrating their freedom and families gathering for photographs. Flashbulbs no longer followed Ryan. They now sought Sophia, the radiant valedictorian, and her proud family. Emily stood a few steps back as Sophia posed with her classmates, her smile wide and genuine. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to soak it in, the sound of her daughter's laughter, the way people gravitated toward her. Sophia was not just admired for her success, she was loved for her kindness, respected for her strength. Alexander slipped an arm around Emily's shoulders, pulling her close. She did it, he whispered, pride gleaming in his eyes. Emily leaned against him, her chest tightening with emotion. We did it, she corrected softly. All those nights, all those struggles, it was worth every second. Alexander kissed her temple, his presence steady as always. They didn't need applause or headlines. Their victory was written in the young woman who now stood before them, proof that love had triumphed over cruelty. Sophia ran back to them, her gown flowing behind her. She threw her arms around Emily first, holding her tight. Mom, I saw you crying during my speech, she teased, her voice full of warmth. Emily laughed through her tears. Of course I cried. You spoke from your heart. That's what made it beautiful. Then Sophia turned to Alexander, wrapping him in a fierce hug. Thank you for everything, Dad. The word Dad struck deeply, not because it was rare, but because it carried truth. Sophia had no idea what was unraveling around them, no knowledge of the man who sat broken in the shadows. To her, Alexander had always been father, and nothing could change that. Nearby, people whispered about the resemblance, about the scandal unfolding on social media. But Emily paid no mind. For once, she refused to let Ryan's shadow darken her joy. This night belonged to Sophia. Later, as the crowd dispersed and families went home, the three of them lingered under the glowing campus lights. Alexander took Emily's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, as Sophia stood between them, her head resting lightly against her mother's shoulder. Emily gazed at her daughter, her heart swelling. She thought back to that stormy night when she had been cast out, suitcase in hand, tears mingling with rain. If someone had told her then that one day she would stand here watching her daughter shine, loved and celebrated, she would never have believed it. Yet here she was. You've given me everything, Emily whispered to Alexander as Sophia stepped away to greet a teacher. He shook his head. No, you gave me everything. You gave me a family. That's something money could never buy. Their eyes met, filled with unspoken gratitude, the bond of two people who had rebuilt their lives together. For Emily, this night was more than a triumph. It was vindication. She had survived humiliation, abandonment, and despair. And now, before the world, she stood not as a discarded maid, but as the mother of a remarkable young woman, and the wife of a man whose love had never wavered. In the distance she knew Ryan was unraveling, his empire trembling, but she no longer cared. His downfall was his own doing. Her victory required no revenge. It was here, alive, breathing, smiling at her, with the same eyes that once broke her, now shining with hope. And for the first time in years, Emily felt completely free. By the morning after the graduation, Ryan Mitchell's world no longer felt untouchable. His name, once a badge of prestige, had become a headline of scandal. Every major news outlet carried the same story. Millionaire guest of honor humiliated at graduation. Graduate appears to be his secret daughter. Ryan woke to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. Investors, board members, reporters, even old friends. His inbox was flooded, his reputation already bleeding. He staggered to his kitchen, pouring himself a glass of scotch though the clock barely struck 9. His hands shook as he scrolled through social media. The images were everywhere. Photos of Sophia at the podium, videos of his frozen expression as whispers filled the hall. Side-by-side comparisons of his face and hers went viral, captions mocking him. Same eyes, same jawline, no doubt. He abandoned them, didn't he? Coward. Millionaire without morals. Ryan slammed the phone down, his chest burning with rage. But anger couldn't drown the truth. People were no longer admiring him, they were dissecting him. The first call came from a key investor. "Ryan, we need to talk," the man said, his tone clipped. "This revelation is damaging. We can't be tied to this kind of scandal. Our shareholders are demanding answers." Ryan tried to steady his voice. "This will blow over. It's gossip, nothing more." But the investor wasn't convinced. The resemblance is undeniable, and the story, an abandoned maid, a hidden daughter, the public will eat this alive. "We're suspending our funding until you resolve this." The line went dead. Ryan's stomach dropped. By noon, more calls came. Board members who once praised him now distanced themselves. A politician who had leaned on Ryan's donations released a statement condemning business leaders who fail to uphold family values. Sponsors pulled out of events, contracts dissolved overnight. His empire, built on the illusion of control, was cracking like glass under a hammer. Vanessa remained silent, her presence colder than ever. She sat across the breakfast table, scrolling through headlines without expression. Finally, she looked up. "They're leaving you because they see the truth. And the truth is ugly." Ryan slammed his fist on the table. "Don't lecture me. You knew what kind of man I was when you married me." Her eyes narrowed. "Yes, but even I didn't know you could be this cruel. Abandoning your own blood? Do you know what that makes you?" Her words lingered like poison. Ryan turned away, unable to answer. By evening, news vans camped outside his penthouse, cameras flashing at every window. Protesters gathered too, holding signs, "Fathers don't abandon children." "We see you, Ryan Mitchell." Inside, Ryan paced like a caged animal. The empire he had built for nearly 2 decades was unraveling in less than 24 hours. Not because of a business rival, not because of a financial crash, but because of a woman he had cast aside and a daughter he had refused to acknowledge. For years he had believed love was weakness. But now he saw the truth. The absence of love was his downfall. And as night fell, Ryan realized the worst was yet to come. Because investors could be replaced, contracts renegotiated. But the respect of the world, once lost, it could never be rebuilt. And Ryan Mitchell was about to learn that lesson in the cruelest way possible. The scandal had stripped Ryan of allies, but the one person he thought would never abandon him was Vanessa. She was his fortress, his shield, the partner whose family name had opened doors money alone never could. Without her, he was exposed. Without her, he was nothing more than a man with money. And now, not even that was secure. For 2 days after the graduation, Vanessa said little. She moved through their penthouse like a ghost, graceful and detached. She attended meetings with her family in hushed tones, leaving Ryan to stew in silence. He watched her with growing unease, knowing a storm was coming but powerless to stop it. On the 3rd evening, she entered his study. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a countdown. Ryan looked up from his desk, where stacks of newspapers screamed headlines about him. Mitchell's secret daughter scandal deepens. Investors withdraw amid abandonment allegations. Vanessa's expression was unreadable, her poise unshaken. She sat across from him, folding her hands neatly. "Ryan," she began softly, "this can't continue." He leaned back, trying to sound confident though desperation clung to his voice. "It will pass. Scandals always do. People forget. Give me time and I'll rebuild." Vanessa shook her head. "No, this isn't just bad press. This is character. And character doesn't fade with headlines." Her words cut deeper than any article. Ryan's jaw tightened. So what? You're gonna leave? After everything we've built together? She held his gaze, her eyes sharp with clarity. Built? You built this on lies, on cruelty, and I stood beside you because I believed ambition could excuse it. But after what I saw at that graduation, I realized something. You didn't just fail as a man, you failed as a human being. Ryan slammed his fist on the desk. Don't moralize me, Vanessa. You knew what you were marrying into. You knew what I was. Her lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. I knew you were ruthless. I didn't know you were heartless. There's a difference. Silence stretched between them, heavy with finality. Vanessa rose gracefully, her decision already sealed. My family will no longer back you. Our investments are withdrawn. The alliances you leaned on, they're gone. Ryan's face paled. You can't do this. Without your family's influence. She cut him off sharply. Without my family, you're already finished. And without me, you're exposed for what you really are. I won't tie my name to yours any longer. For the first time, Ryan felt the full weight of abandonment. Not the kind he had inflicted on Emily years ago, but the kind that leaves a man hollow, stripped of everything. He rose from his chair, desperation cracking his voice. Vanessa, wait. But she was already at the door. She turned one last time, her eyes cold, resolute. You called children a weakness. Tonight, I realized the truth. The only weakness here is you. And with that, she walked out, her heels clicking like the sound of a gavel sealing his fate. Ryan sank back into his chair, his empire collapsing around him. The woman who once stood beside him had left, and with her, every thread of protection unraveled. Ryan Mitchell was alone at last. Just as he had left Emily all those years ago. The silence of Ryan Mitchell's penthouse was deafening. Once a place of glittering parties and endless champagne toasts, it now echoed with emptiness. The curtains were drawn tight, shutting out the flashing lights of news cameras below. His empire had not simply cracked, it had crumbled, and the man who once strutted through boardrooms now wandered through his own home like a ghost. In less than a week, the collapse was complete. Investors had withdrawn every dollar. Contracts evaporated overnight. Former allies refused to take his calls, their polite excuses thinly veiled shields against association with his scandal. Even his own staff abandoned him. Assistants, advisors, drivers, gone. One by one they disappeared, leaving behind resignation letters and silence. The financial papers, stacked high on his desk, told the story more brutally than headlines ever could. Losses mounted in the millions, accounts frozen, assets seized. His companies were no longer his. Boards he once controlled voted him out, citing irreparable reputational damage. But the ruin wasn't only financial. Socially, he was exiled. Invitations to galas vanished, prestigious clubs revoked his membership. Politicians he once bankrolled issued statements denouncing him. Ryan Mitchell, the man who had once symbolized power, had become a cautionary tale. And at the heart of it all was a truth he could not escape. Emily and Sophia. Every article, every headline carried their names now. Sophia Carter, the brilliant valedictorian. Emily Carter, the resilient mother. And Alexander Harrington, the billionaire who stood beside them, a symbol of dignity and true strength. They were celebrated. They were admired. And Ryan was the villain in their story. He spent sleepless nights pacing the empty penthouse, replaying the graduation in his mind. Sophia at the podium, her voice steady. Emily in the crowd, her gaze unwavering. Alexander's hand resting protectively on both of them. The image was seared into his memory, haunting him. For the first time in years, Ryan felt something he couldn't drink away or shout down: regret. He thought of the stormy night when he had pushed Emily out of his mansion, her suitcase small, her eyes wet with betrayal. He had told himself she was weak, that she would fade into nothing without him. But she hadn't. She had risen. She had built a life far greater than his, and their daughter had become living proof of his failure. The irony crushed him. He had spent his life chasing legacy, power, respect, yet his true legacy, the blood of his blood, was standing tall without him, never needing him. One evening, Ryan poured himself another drink, staring out at the skyline he once ruled. His reflection in the glass looked older, broken. For the first time, he whispered aloud the words he had never dared to admit. I lost everything. But the truth was sharper. He had thrown it away. The man who mocked love now sat loveless. The man who dismissed children as weakness now had none to call his own. The man who believed power was eternal now had no one left to answer his calls. Ryan Mitchell, once untouchable, was ruined, not by rivals, not by markets, but by the very choices he had made. And the ghost of the woman he abandoned, and the daughter he denied, would haunt him for the rest of his days. The days after graduation were filled with joy for Emily and Alexander. Sophia's phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates, teachers, and even strangers praising her speech. Articles celebrated her as a voice of resilience, her words quoted across social media. But beneath the pride and celebration, a quiet storm brewed, Sophia's curiosity. One evening, as the three of them sat around the dinner table, Sophia set her fork down and looked at her mother with serious eyes. "Mom," she began softly, "there's something I need to know." Emily froze. She had been dreading this moment for 18 years, and now it had arrived. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded her napkin, stalling for time. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sophia's voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered. "People keep saying I look like him, like Ryan Mitchell. I've seen the whispers online. Is it true? Is he my father?" The room fell into heavy silence. Alexander reached for Emily's hand under the table, giving her strength. Emily swallowed hard, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. She had wanted to protect Sophia from this truth, but her daughter was no longer a child. She deserved honesty. "Yes," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Ryan is your biological father." Sophia's breath hitched, though she had already guessed the answer. "And he knew? He knew about me all this time?" Emily shook her head, pain etched across her face. "No. When I told him I was pregnant, he cast me out. He chose his ambition over us. He never wanted to know you, Sophia. He never looked back." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, her chest heaving as she processed the revelation. "So all those years, he just pretended I didn't exist?" Emily reached across the table, gripping her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry. I thought keeping the truth from you would spare you the hurt. But I see now, you deserve to know." For a long moment, Sophia sat in silence, staring at her plate. Then she turned to Alexander, her eyes brimming. "And you knew too, that he was my blood?" Alexander nodded, his expression solemn. "I knew, but to me that never mattered. From the moment I held you in my arms, you were mine. Not because of blood, but because of love. And I would choose you 1,000 times over." Sophia's tears spilled over, but a small smile tugged at her lips. She stood, moving around the table to embrace Alexander fiercely. "You are my father. You always have been." Emily joined them, wrapping her arms around them both. The three clung together, tears flowing freely, but they were tears of healing. For years, the truth had been buried in silence, a wound left untended. Now finally it was open, and it could begin to heal. Sophia pulled back slightly, her voice trembling but strong. "Blood doesn't make a father. Love does. Ryan may have given me life, but you, Alexander, gave me everything that makes life worth living." Alexander kissed the top of her head, his voice thick with emotion. "And I always will." Emily wiped her tears, her heart swelling with pride and relief. For so long she had feared this moment, yet instead of tearing them apart, the truth had bound them even closer. Ryan Mitchell might have been Sophia's biological father, but he had no place in her heart. That space belonged fully to Alexander, the man who had chosen her, fought for her, and never left. And in that moment, the Carter-Harrington family knew they had won the only legacy that mattered. Love, stronger than blood. Ryan Mitchell once lived for noise, the clinking of glasses at galas, the applause in boardrooms, the whispers of envy wherever he went. But now, silence was his only companion. The penthouse that had once symbolized success stood hollow, stripped of staff, stripped of warmth. Even Vanessa's lingering perfume had faded, leaving nothing but stale air and the bitter scent of whiskey. Every night Ryan sat by the window, staring out at the skyline he no longer ruled. The city glittered, alive with energy, but to him it was a reminder of everything he had lost. Headlines glared back at him from discarded newspapers strewn across the floor. Investors abandon Mitchell amid scandal. Valedictorian's speech raises questions about Millionaire's past. Vanessa Kingsley walks away, family cuts ties. Each headline was a nail in his coffin. The empire he had built so ruthlessly had crumbled, not from market crashes or hostile takeovers, but from the truth he had buried nearly 2 decades ago. He tried to reach out to old allies, but his calls went unanswered. He walked into private clubs only to be turned away at the door. Once, a matron, who used to bow to him, simply shook his head and said, "Not tonight, Mr. Mitchell." Shame burned hotter than fire. What stung most was the constant reminder of Emily and Sophia. Every news cycle seemed to celebrate them. Articles painted Emily as a symbol of resilience, Sophia as the future of brilliance, and Alexander as the embodiment of strength and loyalty. Photographs of the three together spread across magazines, hailed as the family that overcame. Ryan poured himself another drink, his hand trembling. He hated reading about them, but he couldn't stop. Each image gnawed at him, each smile twisted like a knife. Sophia looked so much like him it was unbearable. Yet she was nothing like him. She had honor, she had love, she had a father who stood by her. Everything Ryan had thrown away now thrived without him. Sleep offered no escape. When he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's tear-streaked face from that stormy night, begging him not to cast her out. He heard Sophia's speech, every word about Alexander echoing in his skull. And he saw Vanessa's cold eyes as she walked away, her final words ringing, "The only weakness here is you." Ryan's pride, once his armor, now became his curse. He couldn't bring himself to apologize, couldn't admit his wrongs even as they crushed him. And so he sat, alone, clinging to the ashes of his name. Outside, the world celebrated Emily's triumph. Inside, Ryan drowned in whiskey and regret. His reflection in the glass no longer resembled the powerful mogul of glossy magazine covers. It was the face of a man aged by choices, hollowed by emptiness. One night, as the city roared beneath him, Ryan whispered into the silence, "I could have had it all." His voice cracked, bitter and broken. I could have had them. But he hadn't. He had chosen ambition over love, pride over responsibility. And now he had nothing. Ryan Mitchell was a king dethroned, exiled not by enemies, but by his own betrayal. And the haunting truth was clear. Emily's family flourished because he wasn't in it. Weeks after the graduation, life for Emily, Sophia, and Alexander settled into a new rhythm. One filled not with scandal, but with peace. Their names still appeared in the news, but unlike Ryan's headlines of disgrace, theirs were bathed in admiration. Articles called Sophia a rising star, praised Emily as a mother of resilience, and celebrated Alexander as the silent billionaire who chose family over fame. Yet at home, none of that mattered. What mattered were the small things. Breakfast together at the kitchen table, Sophia sprawled on the couch with college brochures, Alexander reading the paper with glasses perched low on his nose, and Emily humming softly as she prepared dinner. It was a life free of performance, free of masks. One evening, as the three sat together, Sophia spoke with quiet determination. "I've decided," she said, holding up a letter. "I'm accepting the scholarship to Harvard." Emily's eyes filled with tears. Pride swelled in her chest, almost too much to bear. She reached for her daughter's hand. "You've worked so hard for this. I couldn't be prouder." Alexander smiled, his gaze steady. "You're not just going to Harvard, you're going to change the world. And no matter how far you go, this will always be your home." Sophia's face glowed with joy, but then she grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder about him, about Ryan. Not because I want him in my life, but because I don't understand how someone could walk away from this, from us." Emily's heart ached, but she answered honestly. "Some people confuse power with happiness. They believe love makes them weak. But you, Sophia, you've proven the opposite. Love makes us strong, and that's something Ryan never understood." Sophia nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "Then I'll live to prove him wrong." Later that night, Emily stood on the balcony with Alexander, the cool breeze brushing against them. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close I came to losing everything?" she whispered. Alexander kissed the top of her head. "You didn't lose, Emily. You survived. And in surviving, you built something stronger than Ryan ever could. You built a family." Emily smiled softly, her gaze drifting to the stars. "And that's our true legacy." For Ryan, legacy had been skyscrapers and contracts. For Emily, it was Sophia's laughter, Alexander's steady love, and the bond that had carried them through storms. Money could vanish, reputations could crumble, but love endured. As Sophia prepared to leave for Harvard, they gathered one last time as a family in the home that had sheltered their healing. Emily looked at her daughter, standing tall and radiant, and her husband, whose loyalty had never faltered. Her heart whispered a quiet victory. The man who abandoned us thought he had destroyed us, but in truth, he gave us the chance to find something better. Ryan Mitchell's name would fade from power, remembered only as a cautionary tale. But Emily, Alexander, and Sophia would carry forward something eternal. The proof that love, sacrifice, and resilience built the only empire worth leaving behind. And as Sophia stepped into her future, Emily knew the story was no longer about betrayal or loss. It was about triumph, healing, and the undeniable truth. True wealth is measured not in money, but in love that lasts forever.